Because from Clint's mood, one can understand that he is morally killed. The elements are at war in his soul, as if the butterflies in his stomach became brutal and began to suck the strength out of him. He was surprised by John's initiative, but more amazed that Clint had probably finally met someone to whom he could express what was on his soul. Clint looks down and he understands that a complex and difficult conversation cannot be avoided. Apparently, he decided to open up to his interlocutor. He decided to tell his dark story, which he would like to keep silent about. They sit opposite the river, which reflects the golden light of the sky and seems to show another world, where the clouds move in the other direction, and the current changes its direction in the other direction, the so-called looking glass. Clint admitted that he cried, but he didn't cry because his father died, which was obvious. John was surprised by Clint's words because he didn't talk about tears of happiness. Clint's face says that any minute now, he will laugh like a little child. His face will be filled with laughter. Clint choked, but was still delighted with John's understanding. He realized that he had found his zombie, whom he could trust. Sitting in front of such a view makes it very atmospheric to talk about difficult topics, and thus gives them a great friendship bond that gets closer each time. At the first meeting, Clint thought about why it was John, why he was the chosen one among so many people, what fate owed him so much to give him a new life in the body of a zombie. John continued to listen to Clint in silence as this conversation interested him a little. Clint calls him unusual because he was able to sympathize with him, which suggests that few people are capable of this, but he is already an unusual person with the body of a dead man and his strength. John continues to belittle Clint with his snarky remarks because he thinks he's special, and John is right to point this out to him. Clint was infuriated by this attitude towards his injuries and towards him in general. He straightened his shoulders wide and said in a relaxed manner that he had absolutely no sympathy for Clint and that Clint was completely right. Clint did not like this news, since he expected reciprocity from his interlocutor, but received a complete refusal. John looked up and began his magnificent quotes with great meaning, as if inspiration had struck him from heaven, and under its influence he began his story. There are a lot of analogies in the world, and the fact that someone can be truly fearless and someone can be a weakling is as commonplace as it is meaningless, since fate can turn in any direction. The weakling will become strong and fearless, and the fearless one will crawl at his feet. Everything changes every time, and what was a second ago is already meaningless. Fate pushes you forward, but the choice is yours. Live in the past or keep pace with fate. Those whose eyes were full of hope lost everything within 1 second. The whole life of the moment and the past will already play a role only in the form of a lesson, but definitely not to dwell on it. Here he mentioned his parents, whether everything that was in their eyes disappeared after Armageddon. John finished his thought well that the whole past is meaningless. Everything that a person is driven by has no logic. While your legs are moving you, while your heart is beating in your chest, and while your torch is burning, you need to find fuel to saturate it, that there is a goal that will make you move on. John's train of thought amazed Clint greatly, as it was rare to hear such a good thought from a dead person. He breathed a sigh of relief and decided to ask John if he wanted to listen to his story. John is not at all interested, and he is already moving away so as not to hear Clint's whining about his sad life. Clint tells him to sit down and listen to him, since their conversation has already gone too far and they shouldn't waste time with him. The crescent moon peeks out behind the cave while they were talking. It was deep night. Everyone had already lit fires and were getting ready for bed, warming the inner walls of the cave and warming themselves up before the cold night. Michael points out that it's time to go to bed, since they've been without sleep for a couple of days and don't even have the strength to go get food, but everything will be the next day. Sam absolutely agrees with Michael, yawning as he gets ready for bed. Alice put John's little sister to bed and was already at the limit of her strength, getting ready for bed. Tim was completely depressed. It was unclear whether he had planned something or had lost his dignity, lost his faith in the future. Michael and Sam were already drooling by the fire and looking at the seventh dream. Incredibly, Tim found a way out even in such a hopeless situation. Even now he found a piece of glass and hid it in his possession to use at the most inconvenient moment. John and Clint blithely warm themselves by the fire and look at the river, while Clint continues his story in parallel. Clint, finishing the story, said that from the moment his father approached him with a knife, he promised himself that he would kill him at any cost, that his death would be inevitable. The bastard father is a real freak, even among zombies. John was shocked by Clint's cruel story. Even the emotionless zombie was moved by such a story. But still, he was more worried about whether Clint's soldier was in line, whether he had a glass of wine. Clint was petrified by such a sudden question, as if the ancient Medusa had cursed him to live in the shell of a statue. Clint does not consider such information very important, and very persistently asks him to focus on the gravity of the story and not think about the soldiers. John considers this information very important, more important than the whole story as a whole. Clint said that due to the large dose, his father's hands were shaking like a sick person, and he only made a lot of cuts at his feet. He crossed his arms as if nothing had happened and that his dignity was in place. John silently listens to him, but you can feel his distrust of Clint's words. John, keeping his eyes on Clint, continued to listen to him since his story was indeed quite interesting, but the questions about his worth were much more interesting. He became a little sad and began to look at Clint's belt, but Clint realized that John did not believe him and shouted at him. Clint doesn't see any way to prove to John that he's doing well and that everything is in place, except by actually showing it all by lowering his pants, and John tries to stop him. Still, John only lowers his pants even further and sees a leg in front of him which is covered in scars as confirmation of his story. Both remained silent, and then the awkward situation stuck a lump in their throats. If anyone saw them, they would be branded on their backs, like a couple who loved the open countryside. John instantly jumped away from Clint. Their eyes darkened, both crossed their arms, and Clint didn't even have time to lift his pants. The silence did not stop. Only their position changed. The atmosphere in the air was just as tense. John glanced at Clint, his long hair blowing in the forest breeze like a current blowing seaweed at the bottom of the oceans. He looked at Clint's scars, the many cuts that had been caused 15 years ago by his freak of a father who, God willing, was basking in the hellfire of Inferno. Clint noticed this look on himself and offered him something that could take off his panties if he didn't trust him in any way, but John turned his gaze to the side to personify the refusal of the offer. John still asked the question that Clint's scars date back to the time his father started cutting him. Clint indifferently answered him that this was true. The child's blood flowed from deep wounds inflicted on him by his own father, who did not care what to sell or how. He needed drugs and was ready to do anything for them, even cripple his son. Clint tries to kick in front of him, but his father needs to move away from this state, since his eyes are already squinted, and the picture in his eyes is floating like an oil painting in the rain. Little Clint's eyes were empty. Even the tears stopped flowing. The strength to kick was gone, and his father continued to try to cut off his dignity while he could only watch, hanging on the ropes. He's a real madman. Even now he's trying to convince his boss to continue working with him and dealing with his child. The pervert clearly indicates that Clint cannot be helped and such people will never arouse his interest again. He gives him a strong blow and sends him to his bags of joy-giving drugs. He, like a fish, falls towards the red bags and begins to swim, breathing through his gills. The drug killed the person in him, and this is its most dangerous side effect. The worst thing is that after taking such drugs, the person's personality evaporates the very second he gets his high. He was thrown to the floor, but he continues to laugh. There is no longer a person in him. For him, the zombie apocalypse began much earlier. The bodyguard offers to kill Clint's father, but he especially likes the way he behaves. He is intrigued by how he can control a person with his money and capabilities. Finally, the pervert leaves the place of torture of the child, straightening his tie. He leaves the house and takes the guards with him. Clint was in the torture room. He was beaten with a whip. He was stared at. He was cut in front of his own eyes, and all this in one night, during the most miserable night of his life. His eyes are like diamonds, pure, in plan. They are pure because of the emptiness to them. In his eyes there is nothing, not a sparkle of hope, nothing, only emptiness that has absorbed the best in him. Now there is a sparkle in his eyes. The emptiness has been eclipsed against the backdrop of endless rage. He is ready to destroy everything and everyone in front of him. John slaps his cold hand on his leg as if there was something there. John's behavior is very strange, since he was already lowering Clint's pants, and now he is touching his bare leg for no reason. Clint was shocked. He was in a very awkward situation. His face immediately changed to one of incredulity. John pointed out that he caught a mosquito on his leg. Clint probably wouldn't like this, and he definitely wouldn't consider such actions normal. As expected, Clint is furious. He definitely doesn't like such closeness, and even more so such impudence. John's gaze seemed to sense something, as if a sixth sense suddenly made him nervous. He looked back, since for a long time they had not explored what was going on in the cave, since their enemies were also located there. Clint was intrigued by John's words, since it was indeed too quiet and Tim had not made any sounds for a long time. Everything becomes clearer in John's gaze. He feels something bad, but it's probably already too late, since a lot of time has already passed. It can't be. The bus disappeared into nowhere. This all says one thing, yet Tim got free, which doesn't bring any good news. John grabbed Clint's hand and slammed it harshly into the ground, as if he himself had become an enemy in a matter of seconds. Clint's entire palm continues to bleed scarlet blood. It is unknown why he needed Clint's blood, that he decided to wound him at the most unexpected moment. John smears Clint's hand on his face, asking him to lend him some of his blood. The bus is already rushing at full speed. Stones and dust are flying in different directions from the incredible speed that the bus has developed. Tim's gang kidnapped John's sister, and apparently she was not the only one who fell into the clutches of the insatiable Tim. And so it turned out, Alice was also stolen by them, and they are already beginning to tie her to the seat. Six at the wheel tells Tim not to worry about John, since they have already gone far, far from the cave, and it is unlikely that anyone will catch up with them. Tim silently listened to the words of his subordinate and continued to sit and not make a sound. They were able to start the engine of the half-destroyed bus, which is probably considered a great success for them. There are traces of ropes on Tim's wrists, as if he had been put in a stone bag for life, handcuffed, constricting his every movement, but he was able to get out by finding a loophole. Meg's screams pretty much pissed Tim off, and he even had to be distracted by her, since even his subordinate barked at her. Tim listened to the complaints of his six that the little one was constantly yelling and hinting that they should get rid of her, since they were sure that her brother would definitely not return. He looked to the side angrily, as if his hawk's gaze pierced the soul and made his victim shake in horror. Tim, for some unknown reason, approached Alice. What did he want to do, because he had seen a lot over time and would definitely not be merciful to her. He looked up at her, piercing her with his sharp gaze, as if devouring her from the inside with his pressure. She doesn't care about this at all. She behaves as usual. Nothing puts pressure on her, and she doesn't feel its pressure on herself in any way. Her gaze turned out to be stronger. Her fearlessness won in the fight with him, as if a lion and a panther met their gazes. Neither of them knows who is capable of what, but the panther turned out to be stronger with its charisma. After Tim's order to shut Meg up, Alice added fuel to the fire with her caustic phrase about Tim's fear, the main fear from which he is now moving far away, never to meet it on his way again. The pressure in Tim's blood jumped, his veins bulged. Soon her words would be dying words, since it was easier to piss Tim off than to escape from the sleeping guards and steal a bus. Tim clearly indicated that he would easily find a way to torment them, and it would not be difficult for him to find a hobby for himself. And he would not care whether she was a little girl or a lady once loved with all her heart. Suddenly, Tim makes a strong slap in the face to Meg, and he definitely won't get well from John after this. He will pay for his impudence. John will send him to look for parts of the bodies of his sixes in the mountains in the bitter cold. Poor sister, what a vile character Tim is, even if he can be understood since his brother was killed by Clint, but only Clint is to blame for his death. Why do you need to take it out on the poor girl? Alice continues to provoke Tim and asks him to take his anger out on her, and not on a defenseless child. Tim hit the nail on the head. Alice is here as a bird and she should remain silent, since it is to her that he will no longer be merciful, since she betrayed him, although she was never even his property. With his gaze, he definitely made Alice's heart beat faster as a result of the adrenaline in her blood, which made her tremble from the overflow of energy. Light from the fires was coming out of the cave, and John and Clint just entered it in order to scout out the situation inside. Sam was drooling due to a long lack of sleep and passed out literally in a matter of seconds, as a result of which Tim and the whole gang ran away and took Meg and Alice into their hands. Clint is cruel to them and is ready to wake them up with a kick in the stomach so that they don't sleep so sweetly. He clenches his fists in anger at Sam, because why is he sleeping while people are being stolen from under their noses? Sam has no idea who took him, who he took, what he is accused of. He is completely at a loss, and Clint is already preparing a couple of strong blows on him. Michael also jumped up as if sleep paralysis had overtaken him, but Clint turned out to be worse than him and he was able to get out of oblivion. Sam continues to make excuses to Clint and believes that they are not useless. It's just that Tim is cunning to look for, and they didn't keep track of them due to fatigue. Michael and Sam continue to report to him, but Clint ignores all this. Since their fatigue is not important to him, what is important to him is where Tim and the whole gang with the hijacked bus are. No matter how hard Clint is with Tim, no matter how hard Clint deals with Tim, Sam decides to give advice that he needs to be tougher with Tim, and only recently he killed his brother without any regret. Clint was infuriated by Sam's words. He would definitely be in trouble after his words. Clint grabbed Sam by the hair and reminded him that he had just recently killed Will, his little brother, and now he was being tough on him. Still, he got what he deserved, and Clint punched Sam in the nose to shake out his never-ending mind. Michael tries to console Sam, and Sam himself is in pain, as Clint's blow is very strong. Clint doesn't care what his allies think. He found himself a certain team, a new team, a replacement for them. She and John are already one whole, a symbiosis. Together they are capable of anything. Clint has already made up his mind. His decision is unshakable. He is definitely ready to become John's team, but for what reason? Now it is clear that Clint's blood, which John smeared on his eye, turned out to be some kind of enhancement. His eye turned red and his pupil white, like the moon around the bloody sky. The crescent moon floating in the sky faintly covered the dark and dense forest with its pale moonlight. Tim and the gang apparently decided to pause and rest, since they are completely confident that John will never catch up with them again. The bus was rushing at full speed. The speed was amazing. For a broken bus, it was very strong, as if fate itself was pushing their car. An unexpected bump stopped all the speed and power of the bus. All passengers are heavy on their feet and begin to fall off their feet. One of the gang orders the driver to drive the bus more carefully, but he cannot drive carefully, since they are in the mountains and there are no roads. The shaved man remained silent, but something alarmed him behind the front window of the bus. They drive along some path without any navigation where the wheels are brought. That's where they go. Suddenly, the driver sees such a picture. He sees their worst nightmare in front of him. John still managed and caught up. This is the power of the symbiosis of Clint and John. The shaved man screams at the top of his voice as if he saw death in front of him, which is almost true. The wheels of the bus finally stopped. The six's heart not only froze, but also their foot went numb on the brake pedal. An abrupt stop is unlikely to leave passengers alone, and the shaven man may get hit on the bald head a couple of times for such an oversight. Tim approached the six and began to be indignant at what made him stop so suddenly. The shaved man is breathing very heavily, since their main enemy was in front of his eyes. Just one sight terrified him. Even Tim is not so scared. Six says that he was stopped by the silhouette of a familiar dead man. John showed up for just a moment and already stopped an entire bus. Tim was shocked by the news from the six. He was very scared. The possibility of John catching up with them did not even creep into his thoughts. He could not imagine this in any of the variations of further events. He still can't believe it, because it's hard to imagine even in a dream. Before Tim's eyes, the bushes rustled strangely, something that definitely should have kicked his heart into his boots. Meg's cheek is very red. She's trying hard to call him. It is unknown how strong Tim's blow was. She doesn't have time to scream when the fat man covers her mouth, but she still tries to mutter at least something. The fat man shouts to the shaved man to hurry up, start the engine, and drive into the very distance. Suddenly, the glass breaks and its fragments have already pierced the fat man's face, which does not have any good consequences for him. He is trying to react to a sudden attack from the side. John spectacularly bursts into the bus cabin through the window and is ready to send all the kidnappers to the afterlife. The fat man screams at the top of his voice to meet John, since he can hammer nails into the lid of his coffin with his strength alone. John is preparing a strong blow for the fat man. Excess weight will definitely never save him. His face turns to mush, his teeth fly in different directions, and the speed of his fall leaves behind mirages. John sent the fat man to the wheelchair, where he will sit for the rest of his life. John's strength amazes time after time, since it takes a lot of strength to send such a massive carcass flying. Tim's heart began to beat faster. His six had already lost all their spirit. Only snot and drops of sweat were released more and more. A strong dent was left on the fat man's face, indicating that he had been knocked down by a blow of superhuman strength. Steam flowed from John's fist. He was ready to send every passenger except his girls into the world of dreams. Meg was wounded, but he freed one of the captives. The main thing is that he did not forget about the second. Meg was very glad that John had come, but she did not doubt his strength. In any case, he would have come running and saved her in the shortest possible time. He sat her down on the seat and asked about her cheek, what happened to it while he was not around. Meg is such a strong girl that she even endured a blow from an adult man and remained just as kind and sweet. Tim still managed to capture Alice, which is very bad for John, since she is one of the best hostages for John to intimidate. He heard the screams of Alice, who called him with her angelic voice. Tim put that same shard of glass to the delicate skin of Alice's neck and began to threaten that he would kill her if John came even one step closer. John is not so far away. He only needs to make one jerk in their direction, and he is not a survivor, but he will not risk his beloved. She is calm even at a moment when she is on the blade of a knife, when there is a shard of glass at her neck. Tim knows how to threaten his opponents. It's not for nothing that he took them with him. John remained silent once again. It was with him that he was not so talkative. He breathed a sigh of relief, preparing to talk with his longtime abuser. John began his dialogue with Tim and decided to mention that Meg told him that he cut off Alice's leg to save her. But what's strange is that he's the one who's now putting a shard of glass to her neck. Meg silently sits in her place and eagerly awaits the end of the brawl. John was sure that Tim was a bastard, but he was also sure that even he would have something he wanted to protect. But again, he was disappointed. John stepped on Tim's heels with every step, which he definitely shouldn't do. Tim pointed out that it would be better for John not to come closer as he continued to interpret his speech. John asks the question over and over again why Tim threatens to kill the one he loved and protected. The fragment is getting closer to Alice, and Tim continues to yell so that John finally understands that there is no need to move one step closer. The shrapnel had already pierced her skin, and a small stream of blood flowed down her neck, which meant that Tim was serious. Meg instantly became worried about Alice and screamed loudly so that Tim would not lay a finger on her. John is very angry. He clenches his teeth and could have done at least something, rushed into battle without delay. Tim put the fragment to his neck and decided to tell him why he was doing this, the motive for his actions. From birth, he was a spoiled child. He had everything, and now he just wants everything at once. Tim's words startle his sixes, but they understand that it is better for them to remain silent. On the one hand, Tim could dominate and take the desired girl, but John, in his opinion, is a bug who stood in his way. He continues to mock John because he considers his way of thinking stupid, and he himself is arrogant and a complete scoundrel. He points out that John can protect her if he can, and if not, he can destroy her. John realized that there would be no meaningful conversation with him. They would always be fire and water for each other. They had nothing in common, like two boots of a pair, but both looked in different directions. Alice suddenly grabbed Tim's hand as if she was planning something. She turned in him, which greatly alarmed Tim himself, since he could not have expected this. She told him over and over again that she always hated arrogant people like Tim. These words made Tim very angry, and he was ready to plunge this fragment into her, making the deepest wound in her entire life. She also pointed out that she and John had not seen each other for a long time, and he had probably forgotten what a fighting woman she was, that she could put down a crowd of the dead with a swing of her blade. John said her name, not understanding what she meant. She smiled sweetly and decided to remind him of everything through her actions. The cute look instantly changed to the one that killers use before killing, when they show their determination to kill the enemy. Tim was very surprised since he had not seen Alice in anger for a long time. She says that she herself is able to stand up for herself. At the same time, she sticks her fingers into Tim's old wound, from which screams, and attempts are heard from his mouth. She jumped up on one leg, even better than some with a pair of healthy legs. Even if her loved one came to save her, she is not at all a weak flower to wait for protection from him. She herself will put Tim down in a couple of snaps of her fingers. John was incredibly surprised, although he had already seen her abilities, but even so, his jaw hung, and he couldn't say a word. Tim's legs are already falling along with him, which means that Alice defeated Tim in an instant. Divinely beautiful and strong, like a Valkyrie capable of defeating hundreds of warriors and fluttering like a butterfly and stinging like a bee. Tim will definitely not go to heaven for warriors as he lost to our beauty in a one-on-one battle. Once again, the spoiled boy lost the battle between John and Alice. She reigned on him like on a throne. Now you can hang his head on the wall like a pedestal of honor. She is breathing heavily after such a battle, since she has not practiced for a long time, and problems with her leg did not give her the opportunity to train. Tim misunderstood when she couldn't answer him sooner. Previously, she was lenient towards him, which is why she did not respond to his every blow. Alice set foot towards her goal, to see her beloved, as a result of which she never resisted. John and Meg are at a loss, or rather it is impossible to describe their emotions. The family of strong people is amazing. A strong woman needs a strong man. She beamed as she was able to approach John. Now everyone was saved. Perhaps even Alice herself could be saved alone. John met her gaze, the eyes of a loving man, their gaze like a hot kiss that should be dessert at the end of the battle. Meg admires Alice. She would never have thought that her little sister could move so gracefully and hit hard at the same time. Everyone was pleased with the spectacle and the battle itself. Everyone was delighted. Alice effectively stood in a pose so that the blood of all those who admired her would boil and their hearts would boil in this boiling water. They finally returned to the cave to everyone alive and unharmed. Tim is thrown to the ground because his behavior contributed to their attitude towards him. He is very angry at everything and everyone. He lost again. He again lost the opportunity to get everything and everyone. Michael decided to ask what about Tim, what he would do with him. Clint angrily pulled out a knife and said that he would kill him in the very near future. Clint is very angry with Tim's gang because even when they spared them for their own benefit, Tim still found the strength to hijack a bus and kidnap the girls. Tim is even more frightened, as if not an ordinary knife blade is rushing at him, but a large guillotine blade, as if the executioner is already ready to cut off the head of the judge. John again decided to spare Tim. It is unknown whether this is a mistake or he knows the use of him. Clint was puzzled by why John decided to forgive Tim and the whole gang, because they were the ones who stole his girls. It turns out that John needed Clint to tell him about a certain City B before killing him, the same suitcase that was stolen from Clint by Tim, but still Clint was able to take it from Tim. What is he hiding? There are many secrets in it, and this is obvious. John looks with interest at the secret suitcase, which contains something he needs. Clint, opening the case, says that this is a treasure chest that contains everything John needs. He easily snaps open the suitcase, which closes with strong latches to hide the contents. Not everything is so important there. Ordinary things soared into the skies, including even strange things for a boy. Clint is definitely unhappy that he decided to open his case in front of him, since he could not have expected such an eruption of things. John's head also suffered from the sudden attack of the suitcase. Even the suitcase dared to attack the sentient zombie. John is at a loss. He can't understand why Clint needs so many unnecessary things, sometimes even children's ones. Clint is very embarrassed. He couldn't expect this, and he has to justify it by saying that every person can have all these things, and sometimes you can find even worse ones than him. He again rummages through his things in order to find something important there that worries John so much and what he so wants to know about. Incredibly, he pulled out the radio, and apparently, she will be the one who will tell everything in City B. Clint turned on the radio and began to switch it, but in response, she only hissed. He connected to the station of City B, and she finally announced that everyone who hears this message should hurry to the city, since they have a lot of space and goods. John was intrigued by the message and wondered if it was true that they could be protected there, or if it was a trap. Everyone was surprised or glad, since in City B it would be possible to accommodate up to 20,000 people, but still they received this message about a month ago, which could refute the relevance of the information. He abruptly throws the radio at John and says that the radio is old and it's quite hard to hear anything on it. John catches his feed, continuing, listening to all the information about the radio from Clint. John turns out to be an expert in old radios, as he even knows that older models do not have sound recordings, which confirms its age. John is haunted by the question of what binds Clint and Tim together, what constitutes their connection, what is it based on. Clint didn't immediately understand who John was talking about, who he managed to unite him with. Clint pointed at Tim and hit the nail on the head because there was no connection between them. He smiled and apparently decided to start a new story, only this time about Tim and his story that connects them. It's not for nothing that Tim calls himself a spoiled child. After all, his father is the ruler of City B, to which their new path leads them. Tim's father has great power in his hands, because it is not for nothing that his son is so arrogant and everything is allowed to him. Incredibly, how could the ruler of City B be Tim's father? At that very moment, Tim grinned with satisfaction. John immediately cried out how it was that his father, Tim's father, turned out to be the ruler. Immediately after John's screams, a fist flies into Tim's face with such force that even his father's power will not help save him from it. How senseless is the power that he had. John and Clint mock Tim because they cannot believe such information. He cannot be the son of the head of the city. A strong blow hit Tim. This will definitely make him reconsider a couple of dreams, and if he's lucky, he'll even reconsider his views on his behavior. Shave decided to stand up for his older brother, and even decided to threaten Clint and John, since as soon as they arrived in City B, they would definitely not be welcome. He gritted his teeth and promised to tell Tim's father everything they did to them. Clint and John look down on them so that they don't think too much of themselves. Clint easily finds a solution for the shaved man. Just kill them before they get to City B, and that's it. John is merciful as always, although he just recently sent Tim into the world of dreams with one blow. Clint doesn't like the way John acts. He wants to solve them as quickly as possible, make a sieve out of them and not worry about it again. Tim is already rising after a short period of oblivion, and John even thinks that they could be useful. The fat man is still recovering from John's strong attack, and the dent in his face will take a long time to heal, but still John hit the wrong person who injured Meg. John looks around at the inhabitants of the cave and realizes that the road to City B is very long. But it is worth it, since perhaps it is an oasis for them in the middle of the desert. A young mother is rocking her hungry son, who urgently needs to find food, and indeed they all need to find food and provisions. John assesses the situation sensibly and understands that he cannot force children and mothers to get food on their own. Tim didn't like John's idea. He was ready to die, but he would never work for him. Shaven tries to stop Tim, as he is clearly at a disadvantage to show his character, but Tim doesn't care about his words. His pride is higher than that. John also did not like such impudence and turns his furious gaze towards him. The shaved man is already shaking with fear, and Tim was suppressed by the fact that he so instantly turned his attention to him. John had already gathered his fingers into a fist, and with every step he was getting closer and closer to Tim. He looked down at him contemptuously and asked him if he couldn't wait to die, if he wanted it. Tim continues to defy Jonah, saying that it is better to die than to wander at his feet for the rest of his days. John leaned towards him, which indicates that he was clearly in trouble, as he had made him very angry. He looked him straight in the eyes and asked him when he would die, how quickly it would happen. Tim was surprised by this question. He could not expect anything from the once merciful, once cruel John. John's cruelty has taken its toll. He is ready to crush his skull against the walls of the cave, turning it into bone meal, so that at least his bones can become fertilizer for new plants. John's hand is already very close to Tim. He will be in great pain from such a blow. What will happen after such an attack on Tim? What will happen to Tim in the future? Does he have a future as John's main opponent? No one could have expected this from John, since only recently he had forgiven all of Tim's antics over and over again, and now he had smeared his head, leaving cave paintings with his blood. In the cloud of dust, only Tim's legs are visible. It is unknown whether he is alive or whether his lifeless body with porridge instead of a head is already ready to leave his remains to his ancestors. The shaven man began to cry over the death of their brother, since it was he who constantly protected them from all bad weather, no matter how ugly he was. Tim's screams came out of the clouds of dust, which meant only one thing. John spared him. Otherwise, there was no other way, since he simply could not miss. Tears of sadness gave way to tears of happiness. Shaven and the Sixes can no longer help but rejoice that their brother was reborn after death. Still, Tim is afraid of his death. Since he is shaking for himself the most, his life is most dear to him. The pupils constricted very much. He was very scared as he was on the verge of death. His whole life flashed before him. It was like a rebirth or a second birthday for him. John stood up impressively and is preparing a second blow to teach Tim a lesson once again. Maybe right now Tim will be afraid of death. Now he will be afraid to look into her eyes. Tim feels like he's on a roller coaster, and every time he descends from the high part of it, he squeals like a little child. It's already the third descent for Tim, and he still doesn't understand that it's better to obey, and it's even better to be useful, otherwise death. When it comes to him, it must eventually dawn on his stupid head that his pride will only destroy him. And again a fist flies at him, like the scythe of death itself, it takes his life. But he is already running away from John's attack. What is he so afraid of? Before he said something completely different. Why not die for real? What is keeping him in this world? Tim collapses and falls towards his Sixes, who can only shout brother and brother. Another crack has spread in the cave, and John is so strong that he cracks the walls like an eggshell. John explains that Tim does not understand what death is at all. He even wonders how insidious it can be. Tim thinks that he is the most fearless and can easily fight her, but this is definitely not the case. John even tries to teach his enemies what they lack. He even tries to teach stupid Tim. Real death acts very insidiously. It silently waits for the moment when you stop expecting it. And it attacks suddenly when you don't even have time to grieve. That's how terrible it is. Death overtakes everyone, and everyone's path will end at different times. One person's path is full of thorns, another's is full of wealth, but the end is the same for everyone. A rope, soap, a stool. Everything that you can admire forever is torn to pieces before your eyes, and death is to blame for everything. He grabs Tim by the shoulder, which scares him even more. Tim is not afraid of death, because he considers it a moment, but he knows nothing, and John is not the last in matters of death, and like no one else, knows everything about it. John realizes that Tim doesn't care at all about his words. He turns away from him and leaves. Even if he is not patient, he makes a promise that he will not beat him to death. For John, there is not much joy in his life, but he enjoys it sincerely. He does not demand more, as he will end up losing it all to a greater extent. He understands that Tim will not give them peace and decided to send the girls to sleep on the bus, keeping an eye on them. Meg is very happy about this news, since her brother hasn't put her to bed for a long time. All the inhabitants of the cave watch as John silently leaves with his girls. Even Leo was frightened by John's speech and kept it quiet until he was far away from them. Clint orders Leo to shut up. It is unknown why he is doing this to Leo, but for him it is strange. It turns out that Clint admires John with all his heart for his reasonableness and toughness. Clint's admiration was stopped by a certain voice that came from behind him. Tim isn't Tim if he doesn't remain silent and try to turn the crowd against John. Tim says that John is playing giveaway with everyone, but in fact he is waiting for the moment to kill everyone. After such a disgrace, his own blood has only just dried, and he is already preparing his Protestant speech. Clint liked Tim's speech, or rather, he was very tired of it. Clint was impressed by Tim's persistence and fearlessness. John was right. He couldn't care less. He thinks Tim is a dog who just can't shut up, and he's just one of a kind. Who does Tim think he is, when Clint is considered the boss here, and he gives him a slap in the face similar to the slap in the face that Tim gave Meg? Clint sends Tim to the corner for punishment, but he's not a kid anymore, so he still needs to throw a kick to hurry up to his corner. The little sister splashes in the cold, truly sincerely enjoying every second of her pampering. She notices the beauty that the river reflects, the moon and stars that fall behind the reflection of the river. Meg calls her friend Alice to show her endless joy. Alice takes care of her so that she is more careful, and she actually behaves like a real mother. Meg, in response, expresses her consent, but there is no limit to her childish pranks. It is impossible for her to set boundaries. The friend smiles sweetly back, waving at her in greeting. John was silent, and this somehow bothered Alice that she decided to examine him in detail. She thanked him for which he never understood. He was left confused with just one thank you, as he couldn't have expected such frankness so suddenly. Now everything is clear. She thanked him for the fact that John was looking for her and eventually found her. Wasn't it fate, even after such gratitude? She herself shone brighter than the moon in the sky. Finally, a bright smile appeared on John. At first he was confused, but his chest became warmer because of the pleasant words of such a beauty. John has something hidden in his pocket and is trying to find it so he can show it to Alice. "What is this?" It shocked Alice greatly. She was very confused, as if he had taken out a wedding ring. This is the same bandage that Alice had on before the apocalypse, which was stolen from her by a zombie, and John carefully kept it, as if it was leading him to her, like a guiding star leading him to the north. After waking up, the first thing that caught his eye was a bandage that was eerily similar to Alice's bandage. Maybe it was then that he began to have hope of saving her. John, without any regret, snatches the bandage from the bloodthirsty mouth of the dead man, not giving him a chance to survive. Still, he was wounded by the news that visited his head. He could not believe that his loved one could so easily pass away without leaving a trace behind. Later, one of the survivors made it clear that John was definitely no longer a human, and indeed a zombie. He was something in between, a zombie with a human mind. His soul was divided into two parts, a dead man who had the mind of a man and a man with the power of a real dead man. His life was divided into before and after. His despair knew no bounds. He tightly clutched the bandage to get rid of such thoughts. John is not pleased to admit that fate has awarded him such an opportunity to survive. It has turned him into another dead man, and it is unclear whether it would be better for him to die or wander in the body of an irrational zombie. Alice puts her hand on his strong shoulder, trying to reassure him in every possible way. His desire to find his sister and Alice knew no bounds. His heart could not just bark once, and it would humbly calm down. He searched blindly, walking wherever his feet carried him. The worst scenarios of events visited his head. Alice was very frightened by what John experienced, what he had to overcome on the way to them. John hugged his beloved tightly, fully expressing his affection, his sincerity, his joy that they were found alive and not remains on one of the streets. She did not expect such sincerity from him. She was also shocked. She was confused. She never thought that she could feel the warmth from her beloved again. He is on the verge, as if any minute he will burst into tears, and all these tears will fall on the shoulders of the beauty. He thanked her again, but she silently smiled and was also very happy about this opportunity. Alice stroked his head, running it through his silky locks, calling him a puppy, which was very, very sweet. He doesn't really like it when they call him a little dog or worse. Her kind smile does not fade from her sweet face. She continues to delight him and enchant him with her unearthly beauty. Even here, John is depressed. Supposedly, he cannot be like a cute dog since he is dead to himself. She doesn't think so. She doesn't see the downsides of John being a zombie. She touches his cheek, expressing her sincerity in the words she speaks. Even if he is a zombie, he never ceases to be kind, strong, and most importantly, even in the body of a dead man, he remains human. The kindest feelings are written on his face. He has not heard such words in his direction for a long time. His heart beat faster. It is precisely such words that give endless motivation to protect what is dear. Everything around was shining. Wet lips were reaching out to each other. The most significant moment was about to happen any minute. It could not be avoided. A couple of centimeters separate them. Even in a dark night, they shine, like dawn in the early morning. But it's still an eclipse. Meg stops this spectacle and points out that John wants to bite Alice. She has no idea what is happening here. She seemed to want to help, but she stands there in complete bewilderment, silently. John asks her to go play a little, and Alice, embarrassed, cannot even glance at Meg. The little sister will not stand aside and will always give practical advice. She immediately warns Alice not to allow John to bite her. You see, a foul odor will come from her mouth. John is not happy with this news and is completely furious at his little sister's words. Suddenly, a knife is already flying from the side, an enemy or another joker who decided to stick a knife in the back. John is not so weak as not to catch such a childish attack. Even in complete ignorance, he is ready to catch a bullet that flies in front of his eyes. Again, this Clint, his ability to intervene at the most inconvenient moments is amazing. He arrived in time like never before to throw a knife at an ally, in time for privacy with his beloved. Elia and John recognize a familiar silhouette. It can be recognized from 1,000, and its impudence from millions. He clearly doesn't care, but still apologizes to them for interrupting their intimacy. Even when he wants to sleep, he will give his friend some attention to play a little joke on him. That's all Clint. John asked more than once to give him at least a little free space. For some unknown reason, Clint took the scissors with him. Something had crept into his head again, and John might not like it. Here it is, an evil grin. All his evil intentions have been revealed. He wants to deprive John of a couple of silky strands from his head. John cannot react to this in any way other than with apprehension. When the scissors are in Clint's hands, you can't expect anything good from him. What has gotten into his skull? The hair is already lying on the cold stone floor, which means that the haircut is already over. Clint wanted to do one thing, but it turned out completely different, leaving everyone nearby in shock, whether from minute to minute they would pour out laughter. What is John's transformation after Clint's masterful haircut? What will make them all laugh out loud? Apparently Clint did what he wanted. It turned out very funny. The brutal zombie turned into a cute, long-haired teenager. Everyone is already trying hard not to laugh at John. They are trying not to reveal their emotions, but this does not help them, since they literally have everything written on their faces. Everything is in vain. Sam and Michael are already tearing their stomachs with laughter. This reaction is typical. Anyone in their place would not have been able to restrain themselves. Alice, Leo, Meg, and Clint hold back their emotions, clutching their own mouths so as not to laugh out loud. Since he received only ridicule from his friends, he can only admire himself in the reflection of the river. What is going on in his head? What did Clint do? Clint is not a master hairdresser. He is a master at ridicule. He has a talent for this. Even John himself laughed. What an irony. Clint is very strong in this type of activity. John turns towards Clint, who is definitely not going to get well soon. And Clint had already prepared a camera to capture such a moment in order to visit the phone gallery in the future and be at that very time with the warmest moments that decades later would give warm emotions. As expected, John doesn't like sneaky photos and instantly reacts with a hard slap to the face. The walls of the cave are covered with the warm light of the flames of the fires. But the cozy atmosphere is undermined by bad news. One of the inhabitants of the cave is sick. He is clearly unwell and needs urgent help. He is very unwell. Can he still be helped, and as soon as possible? Otherwise it will be too late to help him. Everyone around is wary of it, which a sick person might throw out, since such symptoms can only indicate one thing. Hunger is to blame, but he himself is also to blame. These symptoms are similar to the symptoms of someone who has eaten the meat of the dead, or rather someone who has not eaten it for a long time. All his strength was gone. He fell on the cold floor, but he couldn't die. Still, everyone adheres to the idea that the man died. It is no longer possible to save him. Tim was frightened by this. The theory about the absorption of zombies turned out to be true. These are the symptoms after his experiments on people. He feels guilty before him, or is it just fear? Shaved speaks precisely of the consequences that resulted from eating zombies. Zombie meat kills in any case. It doesn't care that the consumer has stopped eating it. It won't make him its slave. It will just kill him. That's how harshly the virus treats people. Leo soaks a rag in water and says that zombie meat should under no circumstances be consumed as food. It certainly won't lead to anything good. Even those who did not become zombies after being absorbed by zombies did not become zombies will die in the future without any obstacles. Many people have already become victims of Tim's insidious experiments, but now he will be in trouble. No one will take his side. There are many people in the cave who have at least once tasted zombie meat, and this scares them, plunged them into fear. The worst thing about this food is that it is addictive, and for good reason. Since everyone enjoys it as if they had never eaten anything tastier, they plunge into ecstasy, as if under the most powerful drug. Anyone who receives a certain level of toxins will die or become a zombie. It's only a matter of time, and such information is terrifying, because no one even felt the consequences after such meals. Someone is already scratching the back of their head. What could be creating such an itch? It can't be where everyone around them was looking when they are already rotting alive and turning into dead people, and the skin under their hair has already darkened and resembles the skin of a zombie. What did they all hope for when they fed on the dead, or their brains were controlled by a foul odor that enslaved their minds? The screamer began to call out to everyone in fear in order to identify the next madman who was trying zombie meat. Everyone passed the screamer test, yet most of the inhabitants of the cave have already tried zombie meat, and without quick decision-making, everything can only get worse and lead to tragedy. Finally, Tim himself understands that the situation is heating up and soon accusations will fly at him, which suggests that nothing good will come for him. Everyone in the cave is like a Trojan horse. Some take zombie meat with them, some have no meat, but they become zombies. Even one sick person can infect everyone in the cave. It's strange, but Clint is happy that the situation is heating up. But Michael is not happy that there are so many sick people. Clint thinks sensibly, but not fairly. He believes that there is no other way than to leave everyone in the wake of fate, to hope for fate, only to leave everyone here to certain death. Clint has already made up his mind. His decision may be wavered, but in the future he will always find a reason to get rid of unnecessary people. Clint does not hold his people. He waves his arms and indicates that everyone should collect their things. They separate. He is already looking for a candidate for the position of leader in order to give all the patience to him, since our boy is not going to bother with solving the problem. He rests against the strong chest of John, who has already arrived and just in time to start solving the problem and not leaving everyone here. Clint didn't like who he bumped into. Any collision at all would have led him to such a reaction. John despises Clint for this way of solving problems, even humiliates him a little for such cowardice, since the commander is the last one to flee the ship, nothing else. Clint doesn't like this kind of impudence. He's furious because he didn't expect his friend to stand up to him. John understands the difficulty of the situation. Most of them ate zombie meat, and if he took responsibility for leading them, let him take it only on himself. Clint can only rub his nose and remain silent in response to John, since he is truly wrong. Most of those caught trying to eat zombie meat turned out to be alive, and this is real happiness, since many were transformed into zombies instantly. John clearly wants to override Clint's decision, since John's conscience is much clearer than Clint's. John believes that Clint has no right to leave those people alone. He must help them, even if they are useless in the future. Clint is only concerned with the visual component of John. Only here he wants to find a common language with him. He exhales and even thinks that John has become nicer. But it's true that John's new image is good. The one who did this has taste. Clint still listened to John and decided to help the others, and also asks Leo for help. Leo didn't expect that he would be forced to treat everyone, although this is stupid, he's a doctor. People from the outside were instantly glad that they could be helped, since among them was a doctor who is very much valued at such a time. It's all due to the lack of calories and food. The body doesn't have enough of them, and it begins to be drawn to meat, at the present time, the meat of the dead, which needs to be replaced. John adjusts his glasses and understands that to maintain life he needs to bring animal meat, which is quite difficult to find at this time. Clint immediately begins to be indignant, since meat of animal origin is very difficult to find and almost impossible. Still, someone's stinking heap lies on the ground. Perhaps it belongs to some animal, which suggests that those people can still be saved. Clint hints that this pile could lead them to a lot of meat. John is trying to examine the whole pile in detail in order to quickly find this animal that will save people from inevitable death. Clint notices a haze creeping across the surface of the pile, indicating that it was made not long ago. John thinks Clint is disgusting, as he would only like stinking smoke over a bunch of people to discuss. He cannot take his eyes off such a spectacle, smoking with its disgusting smell. Clint understands that the chances of finding the animal in such a large forest will be difficult, even impossible. John points in the direction where the tracks lead that do not look like human ones. Clint realizes his stupidity, and they begin to follow the tracks. Clint orders Tim to be tied to him, and they should already be moving out. As soon as Clint turned away, his face changed and turned into a face of shock. What brought him to this? Sam and Michael are not far away from Clint. Both look at the pile exactly with him and discuss it in exactly the same way as he does. Tim is waiting for him to be tied up and for them to go in search of the secret animal. Clint will not feel sorry for such people. He immediately hits everyone on the head so that they don't behave stupidly. Everyone got it, even Tim, who didn't do anything extra, but fell under Clint's hot hand. John tries to cheer Clint up because after such a shame, it will be difficult for him to forget him. John's gaze changed sharply. Something prompted strong attention in him. Maybe an enemy, or maybe that same animal was found. He grabs Clint's hand and forces him to stop. Something is still wrong. Clint doesn't listen to him and continues to walk, not seeing any obstacles in front of him, like a bull at the sight of a red flag. Clint looks down and sees something that scared even John, as if they didn't notice, but were walking towards the abyss. Under Clint's feet, there were a lot of remains of blood and rotten flesh. Not that a crowd of zombies had already been here. This whole picture shocked everyone. Something incredibly vile fell under their feet, something that did not bode well. Heaps of bones, flesh and blood, and most importantly, a vile smell that makes it impossible to even take a breath, as if clogging the nostrils. The meat was already decomposing, and when I grabbed some of the meat with a stick, it began to drip down like some kind of sauce. Such horror can only be encountered during the apocalypse. Such a smell comes from rotten meat. Clint can't believe what exactly zombies could do, that they could kill every single animal and leave them only rot. John confirms that these definitely cannot be the Walking Dead, who already like animal meat. John studied everything in detail and noticed some traces that belong to the killer of all these animals. One can only envy John's attention, the only one who time after time finds all the traces that no one in the gang can see. Clint immediately guesses whose footprint it is, since it was very large, which means that the animal must be of amazing size. John silently ponders who the giant monster that left such traces could be. Clint was distracted by a sound from the side that was coming from behind everyone. The giant boar turned out to be the same killer of animals. Only from what moment did boars become predators? The giant screamed at the top of his voice to demonstrate his strength. He was hostile, which was quite strange for an ordinary boar. Everyone is already scattering in different directions, and Clint froze, as if in a deer's stupor. Nothing could move him. A strong stench came from the hungry monster, which confirms the boar's involvement in devouring those animals. Clint can only stand in front of the monster and silently look at it. There is no way to even run away, since it is already